Hi everyone! So I've been posting a lot of cooking videos on my Instagram story, and I've had a lot of requests for me to show you guys some of those recipes. One of the main recipes that I had a lot of people ask me about is Afghan bread, homemade Afghan bread. So I am going to share that recipe with you guys today. All you really need is oil, salt, sugar, warm water, yeast, and bread flour. If you don't have bread flour, you could try substituting it with all-purpose flour. I haven't tried it, but I've seen a couple recipes using all-purpose flour, but I specifically use bread flour. So here I'm gonna pour in 1 cup of warm water, not too hot because you don't want to kill your yeast, but warm enough for it to bloom, and 2 tablespoons of sugar. Now the yeast will eat the sugar kinda, and it will give it life and it will bloom. And we're also gonna add 2 tablespoons of yeast. Now once you put that in there, you're gonna wanna mix this all up beautifully. Now we're just gonna cover it with some plastic wrap. My plastic wrap is all bunched up, but we're gonna cover it with some plastic wrap and just let that bloom for 10 minutes. Okay, so remember that, y'all. So our 10 minutes are over and the yeast has beautifully bloomed. I'm gonna take this off, and if you put plastic wrap on top of your blooming yeast, it starts to swell a little just because of all the chemistry that's going on in there. So let's take this off. I'm just gonna show you guys a little bit of what's going on in there. Look at that. That is amazing. And the smell is kind of strong too, but I love it because it means it's working. So once we have that in there, we are going to add 3 tablespoons of olive oil. I usually like to add a little bit of water in my, this is from the yeast, but I usually like to add a little bit of water in my spoon so the olive oil comes out easier. So that's 1 tablespoon, 2 tablespoons, and 3 tablespoons. And it's like a foam. The yeast is like a foam at this point. That's how much it's worked in. And I'm going to also add some salt. Now, a lot of people say that it's like a myth that salt kills yeast, but it's just a myth, at least from what I've heard. So it will not kill yeast unless you put too much of it or you leave it in there for a really long time. So you should be good. At this point, I'm gonna attach my little kneading attachment for my mixer. Now, like I said, you don't need a mixer, a kneader, or anything like that to do this. You could do this by hand. Traditionally, it is done by hand, so you're fine if you don't have one of these. Now I'm going to add 4 cups of bread flour. Now, like I said before, if you don't have bread flour, you could use all-purpose flour. I've never done it, so I don't recommend doing that for your first try. But hey, if you want to try it out, go ahead. So I just put 2 cups of flour in, and I have 2 cups measured in this bowl that I'm going to pour in. All that bread flour out, and although I say you do need 4 cups of bread flour, the chances are you will obviously need more. When you're working with dough, you usually need more flour to work it out on your while you're like, basically it's 4 cups by recipe, but if you notice that, let me show my face. It's 4 cups by recipe, but if you notice that it is wetter, you add more dough. It's kind of, you kind of eyeball it. So now I'm gonna start my kneader. I forgot another step. After you put your flour into your yeast mixture, you're gonna add another cup of warm water. And start the kneading process. It should look like this. gonna knead this for about 10 minutes. If you're doing this by hand, definitely by 10 minutes. If it still doesn't look ready and like it's all together, keep kneading it. Add more flour if it's sticky. As you can see, mine is a bit sticky, so I'm going to add a little bit more flour. You can see that. It's a bit sticky. Alrighty, so we have our dough here. I'm just gonna put some flour on my hand and scrape off the sides to make it one congealed ball. Alrighty, so now what we're gonna do is we're gonna take out this dough, this ball of dough on a wooden board, and we're going to separate it into smaller balls. So as soon as it's done rising, we can just go ahead and flatten it out and put it in the oven for the breads to bake. So we have our wooden board here. I'm gonna put some flour down on it so that the dough doesn't stick, and I'm gonna kind of flatten it out on here. And I'm gonna take this dough, I'm just gonna flip it over. It's stuck, so put some flour on our hands and just put that there. Now we have this big blob of dough here, and I am going to try and cut it into pieces so we can roll it into smaller balls and put it in a warm place for it to rise. And if you touch it, it bounces right back up. It feels nice and light. You can see like that. Alrighty. So I have this scraper right here. I'm going to cut it into pieces. Now, if you are going to make a longer, more traditional piece of Afghan bread, this is enough to make about 2 Afghan breads. So you can just keep it where it's at. And if you choose to use it in smaller pans, which we're gonna do, we're gonna turn it into 4 smaller Afghan breads. It can still be the traditional shape, but it will just be smaller. We are just using a smaller oven, so we are going to make them smaller. And then we're gonna turn these into balls. And my technique doing this is not the best, but kind of just bunching it up at the end so the top is nice and soft. And that's one. And then I'm gonna do the other. See? These may look super small right now, and you're probably wondering how is this gonna make a whole Afghan bread, but it's gonna rise, so it'll get bigger. So yeah, here we have it, 4 balls of dough. So we can let them sit and rise, and then we are going to turn that into Afghan bread. So I have my baking sheets laid out. Like I said, we're using a smaller oven, so I'm using smaller baking sheets. If you have, if you're using a bigger oven, use the bigger, more original ones. So I'm gonna first butter my pans. Now, a lot of people, even me, when I first did this, I used oil on the bottom, but the breads still seem to stick. So I'm just gonna take a stick of butter and kind of draw on this with it. Now, it's easier to do it with your hands if your butter is softened, but I did not soften my butter. So I'm just doing this with a hard stick of butter and scrubbing the panda. So now that I've buttered that, I am going to take my first thing of dough. It's nice and soft. I have it in my hand. I am going to put some, basically cover it with some oil. Both sides, top and bottom. Alrighty, that's what that looks like. I'm just going to place it in the middle of this baking sheet. Now, a lot of people like to rise their dough in bowls, but when you put it in the middle of this baking sheet, since with Afghan bread, all you gotta really do after it rises is just use your hands to flatten it out. We're just gonna put that in there and it's gonna rise like this, and then we're gonna do everything from here on out. Less dishes to get dirty and to clean after, and it's just an easier process. So that's the first one. Now we're gonna put these in a warm place for them to rise and get nice and big, and then we'll see you guys back in an hour when we start shaping the dough. So now we're gonna make a glaze for the bread in order for it to be nice and dark and shiny. So we're gonna add 1 cup of water and 2 tablespoons of flour. And we are going to whisk this all together. And it's gonna get nice and thick. You put it on medium heat. This is when it raised. So now what we're gonna do is we're just gonna, oh my gosh, put some oil on your hands. That way your hands don't get stuck to the dough. And traditionally Afghan bread is like long, like that. You can do any shape you want, really, but in this household we do what's traditional. Just kidding, we made a circle one the other day too. So there you go. Nice and long, and this is gonna get really fluffy. I kind of like to make it like a fat oval. It's a good way to explain it, like that, or more like a rectangular fat oval. But then we have this this stuff that we made, and we're gonna use this. We're gonna dip our fingers in it with our clean gloves. You don't need to use gloves. I'm just using it because when you do these imprints, just drag your hands down like that. And these little imprints, they have that traditional Afghan bread look. As you can see, these gloves are big on my hands, but it's getting the job done. So they're just basically ridges. So you get your bread to look wavy. Okay. Alrighty, so now we're gonna sprinkle on our seeds. And we are going to let this sit for about 5 minutes so it puffs up a little bit more again, and then we are going to put it in the oven for 390 degrees Fahrenheit for about 12 minutes. The bottom cooks pretty fast, so I transition mine. I put it into the bottom first, and then after about 5 minutes, or 5 or 6, 7 minutes, I notice the bottom starts to brown a lot. I put it on the top rack, and then the top gets real nice and golden brown and crispy. And voila! Thank you so much for watching my video. I hope you guys enjoyed. Please like, share, and subscribe, and I look forward to cooking with you guys next week. Bye!